In 1963, a man in Cappadocia, Turkey, knocked down a wall in his basement. Behind it, he found a room. Behind that room, another room. Behind that, a tunnel. The tunnel went down. He followed it. Down through solid rock. Down past one level. Then another. Then another. He kept going. When archaeologists finally mapped what he'd found, they couldn't believe it. The tunnel system dropped 280 feet into the earth, 18 levels carved from solid volcanic rock, miles of passages connecting thousands of rooms, ventilation shafts, water wells, storage chambers, living quarters, chapels, even a school. This was Derinkuyu, the largest underground city ever discovered, and here's what keeps me up at night. It could hold 20,000 people. Not for a few days, for months, maybe years. The ventilation system still works. The wells still provide water. There are massive stone doors that roll closed from the inside. Each level could be sealed off separately. Once those doors closed, nobody was getting in. Someone built this, not recently. The earlier sections date back at least 2,800 years. Maybe older. Nobody knows for sure. But here's the real question, the one that matters. Why? Why would anyone carve an entire city into solid rock? Why go down 18 levels? Why build it to hold 20,000 people for extended periods? Why the rolling stone doors? Why seal each level separately? What were they hiding from? The standard answer is invaders. Armies swept through this region for thousands of years. Hittites, Persians, Romans, Arabs, Mongols. Having a place to hide makes sense. But here's what bothers me. You don't build something this elaborate for occasional raids. Raids last days, maybe a week. You could hide in caves for that. You could run to the mountains. This is different. This is architecture of sustained terror. This is what you build when the threat isn't temporary, when you know it's coming back. When you know you'll need to disappear underground for months at a time. And Derinkuyu isn't alone. They found dozens of underground cities in Cappadocia, hundreds of smaller tunnel complexes. Some connect to each other through miles of passages. You could travel between cities without ever seeing the surface. An entire civilization went underground. The question isn't just what they were hiding from, it's what did they know that we don't? Building an underground city sounds impossible. Not difficult. Impossible. You're not digging a basement. You're not carving out a wine cellar. You're excavating millions of cubic feet of solid volcanic rock by hand, with bronze and iron tools, no explosives, no power tools, no modern engineering. The rock at Derinkuyu is called tuff. It's compressed volcanic ash. That's good news and bad news. Good news, when you first cut into it, it's relatively soft. You can carve it. Bad news, it's still rock. You're still chipping away tiny pieces at a time. Let's do the math. Derinkuyu is roughly 280 feet deep, 18 levels. The complex covers about 4 square miles if you include all the passages. Conservative estimates put the total volume at around 2.5 million cubic feet of removed rock. That's not a rough number. That's rock that had to go somewhere. Where did it go? Nobody knows. There's no massive pile of debris near the city. No ancient quarry filled with tuff. The rock just disappeared. Either they hauled it miles away or they ground it to dust and scattered it. Both options are insane when you think about the labour involved. Here's what makes it worse. They didn't just dig down, they carved. Every room has smooth walls, curved ceilings, decorative columns. Some passages have steps cut directly into the rock. The ventilation shafts are perfectly vertical for hundreds of feet. The wells are narrow and precise. This isn't mining. This is sculpture, and they did it in the dark. Think about that. You're 200 feet underground. No windows, no natural light. You're working by oil lamp or torch. The smoke from your light source fills the chamber. You can barely breathe. You can barely see. And you're supposed to carve precise architectural features into solid rock. The ventilation system alone is a miracle. There are 52 ventilation shafts at Derinkuyu. They run from the surface down to the lowest levels. Some are over 180 feet deep. They're about 3 feet wide, perfectly straight, perfectly vertical. How do you dig a vertical shaft 180 feet deep through solid rock? You can't dig from the bottom up. You have to start at the surface and work your way down. But if you're digging straight down, how do you remove the debris? How do you get tools to the workers at the bottom? How do you keep the shaft from collapsing as you go deeper? And here's the thing. These shafts had to be finished first, before you could dig the rest of the city. Because without ventilation, everyone underground would suffocate. You need airflow before you can have 20,000 people living in sealed chambers, so the first workers had to dig these shafts blind, not knowing if they'd work, not knowing if the whole project was even possible, just digging down through darkness and hoping. The water system is just as crazy. There are wells throughout the city. They tap into underground aquifers. Some wells are over 180 feet deep. They're narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, dug straight down through solid rock until they hit water. But here's what gets me. The wells are positioned perfectly. They hit water at different levels. This means whoever designed this understood the geology. They knew where the aquifers were. They knew how deep to dig. They planned the entire city around water sources they couldn't see. How? There's no trial and error here. You can't dig a test well 180 feet deep, realize you missed the aquifer, and just try again 10 feet over. Every well had to work the first time, the planning had to be perfect. And then there are the doors, the famous rolling stone doors of Derinkuyu. Massive circular slabs of rock, 3 to 5 feet in diameter, 1 to 2 feet thick. They weigh between 400 and 1,000 pounds. They roll on tracks carved into the floor. When closed, they seal passages completely. Each level has multiple doors, maybe 20 doors per level. That's hundreds of these massive stone wheels throughout the city. Carving them is one thing. Installing them is another. The doors had to be perfectly circular, perfectly balanced. The tracks had to be perfectly level. The door had to roll smoothly despite weighing half a ton, and it had to seal tight enough to keep out enemies but easy enough for people inside to move. They managed all of this, in the dark, hundreds of feet underground. But wait, it gets weirder. The doors only lock from the inside. There's a hole in the centre of each door. You can stick a pole through it and roll the door closed from inside the chamber. But once it's closed, there's no way to open it from the outside. No handles, no mechanism, nothing. This means the city was designed for defence from within, not as a fortress you retreat to and then sally out from, as a hiding place, a sealed tomb you enter and then lock behind you, hoping whatever's outside gives up and goes away. Who designs a city like that? The layout tells you more about the fear. The top levels are simple. Storage rooms mostly, animal pens, basic chambers. If you're just hiding from a quick raid, you stay up here, close the first door, wait it out. But the deeper you go, the more complex it gets. Living quarters, kitchens, schools, churches, meeting halls. These are spaces for long-term habitation, for communities, for life underground. The bottom levels are the most protected, the most isolated, multiple doors between them and the surface. These are the last refuge, where you go when everything else fails. The city is designed in layers of increasing desperation. And here's what haunts me. They used it. We know they used it. The walls show soot from thousands of oil lamps. The wells show signs of regular maintenance. The storage rooms contained food remains. The living quarters show evidence of occupation. People lived down there, not for days, for extended periods. Generations of people knew these tunnels, knew which passages led where, knew how to navigate in darkness, knew how to survive without seeing the sun. There are children's rooms in Derinkuyu, small chambers with low ceilings, carved toys found in the debris. These weren't emergency shelters, these were homes. Kids grew up down there, in the dark, in sealed chambers, learning to live like moles. What kind of world makes that necessary? The engineering gets more impressive the more you think about it. The ventilation shafts don't just provide air, they're positioned to create natural circulation. Warm air rises through some shafts, cool air descends through others. The whole system breathes without any mechanical help. The water, wells are connected by channels. If one well runs dry, water flows from others. The system is redundant, resilient, designed to keep working even if parts fail. The passages wind and turn. They're deliberately confusing. If enemies somehow got past the doors, they'd get lost in the maze. But the residents would know the way, would know the shortcuts, the hidden passages, the escape routes. Because yes, there are escape routes, tunnels that lead to other underground cities miles away. You could flee Derinkuyu without ever surfacing, could travel through solid rock to another refuge entirely. They thought of everything, every detail, every contingency. This wasn't built in a panic. This was planned, engineered, refined over generations. And that's what scares me. This level of preparation doesn't come from one bad experience. It comes from repeated trauma, from a threat so consistent, so inevitable, that you spend centuries building elaborate underground cities, that you teach your children to live in darkness, that you design your entire civilization around the ability to disappear. The engineering is incredible. The craftsmanship is beautiful. The planning is genius. But it's all in service of hiding, of vanishing from the surface world, of sealing yourself in stone and praying whatever's up there doesn't find you. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. Maybe subscribe and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I always check the comments and it's fascinating to see people from all over the world. Anyway, back to the water system. Because there's something strange about how they managed it. Something that doesn't quite add up when you think about the logistics. Water is the first thing you think about when you're trapped underground. Not food, not light, water. You can survive weeks without food, days without water, hours without air. That's the hierarchy of survival, and whoever built Derinkuyu understood this perfectly. The water system at Derinkuyu is maybe the most impressive part of the entire complex. Not the size, not the depth, the water. Because they didn't just need water, they needed clean water, reliable water, water that couldn't be poisoned from above, water that would flow for months. They got it. The main well shaft drops all the way from the surface to the lowest level. That's 280 feet straight down through tuff. The shaft is about 3 feet wide. Perfectly vertical. You could drop a stone from the top and it would fall straight to the bottom without touching the sides. This wasn't easy to build. You can't dig a well from the bottom up. You have to start at the top, which means someone on the surface was drilling down, while people below were carving out rooms. The two groups had to meet in the middle, had to align perfectly. They did. The well provided water to every level. Small channels branched off at each floor, carved into the walls, sloping gently downward so water would flow. Each level had collection basins, storage pools, distribution points. The water was clean. The well tapped into an underground aquifer. Natural filtration through layers of rock. No surface contamination. No way for enemies above to poison it. Even if they knew exactly where the city was, even if they found the entrance, they couldn't reach the water source. That's deliberate planning. But here's what makes it strange. The well is too sophisticated for a simple hiding place. If you're just ducking underground for a few days during a raid, you bring water with you. clay jars, leather bags. You don't need a permanent well system. This system suggests long-term occupation. Weeks, months, maybe longer. The wells at other underground cities in the region tell the same story. At Kaymakli, another massive complex nearby, there are multiple wells, redundant systems, backup sources. At Oskanak, the third largest site, the wells connect between levels in a network. These people weren't just worried about water, they were obsessed with it. Look at the storage capacity. At Derinkuyu, there are dozens of large chambers near the wells. These rooms have drainage channels cut into the floors, collection basins in the corners. They're designed to hold water, lots of it. Archaeologists estimate the city could store enough water for 20,000 people for several months. That's millions of gallons, all underground, all protected. Why so much? What scenario requires that level of preparation? A siege doesn't make sense. If an army surrounds your city, they're not staying for months. They move on. They have their own supply problems. Ancient armies didn't have the logistics for extended sieges of hidden underground complexes. Too expensive. Too difficult. A drought is possible. Cappadocia has dry periods. Water becomes scarce. But you don't build 18 levels underground to escape drought. You dig deeper wells on the surface. You build cisterns. You move to where water is, unless you can't move, unless something prevents you from being on the surface at all. The water channels show something else interesting. They're designed for flow control. Small stone plugs could block channels, divert water to different levels, shut off supply to upper floors if needed. That's tactical thinking. If enemies breach the first level, you seal it off, cut the water, force them to either leave or go deeper. Each level becomes a defensive position. Each level can be isolated. The wells themselves could be defended. The shafts are narrow. Only one person can climb at a time. There are small chambers next to the main shaft at several levels. Guard posts. Someone could sit there with a spear. Anyone trying to climb up or down becomes an easy target. But defended from what? Human enemies climbing a well shaft? That's not a realistic threat. If invaders find your city and breach your defences, they're not going to climb down a wet vertical shaft in the dark. They'll use the passages, the stairs, the main routes, unless the threat comes from the well itself. Something that might enter through the water source, something that needs to be kept out. The ancient texts from this region don't mention the underground cities directly, but they mention water contamination, poisoned wells, disease spreading through water sources. The Hittite tablets, written when these cities might have been built, talk about plagues, sickness that spreads through entire populations. Maybe that's it. Maybe the water system isn't just about supply. It's about isolation, about creating a completely closed environment where nothing from outside can enter. Not air, not water, not disease. The wells tap deep aquifers. Water that's been filtered through hundreds of feet of rock. Water that's never touched the surface. In a world where surface water might be contaminated, where rivers might carry disease, where wells might be poisoned, this makes sense. The storage capacity makes sense too. You're not storing water for drinking. You're storing water because you can't risk opening the well shaft, can't risk any connection to the surface. You seal everything. Use what you have. Wait. Wait for what? For the danger to pass, for the contamination to clear, for whatever threat exists above to move on or die out. The channels between levels support this. They're not just for distribution, they're for containment. If one level becomes contaminated, you seal it, cut the water, isolate it. The people on other levels survive. This is quarantine thinking. This is pandemic architecture, built in stone, built to last, built by people who'd seen what happens when disease spreads unchecked. The Romans later praised the water systems in Cappadocia. called them marvels of engineering, but they didn't build them. They found them, used them, maintained them. The knowledge was already there. The systems already worked. Whoever designed this understood hydrology, understood pressure, understood flow rates and filtration and storage. This isn't primitive technology. This is sophisticated engineering executed with simple tools, and it's still working. After thousands of years, water still flows through those channels. The wells still tap the same aquifers. The storage basins still hold water. The stone doesn't crack, doesn't leak, doesn't fail. That's the thing about building in rock. If you do it right, it lasts forever. The people who built this knew they were building for the long term, knew their children's children would need this, knew the threat wasn't temporary. They were right. The cities were used for centuries, expanded, modified, improved. Each generation added something, made it better, made it safer. Because whatever they were hiding from, it kept coming back. The doors are what make this real, not the size of the city, not the depth, the doors. Because when you see them, you understand. This wasn't theoretical. This wasn't just in case. These doors were meant to be used. They're massive. Circular stone wheels about 5 feet in diameter. Some weigh over 1,000 pounds. They roll on tracks cut into the floor. When closed, they seal the passage completely. No gaps, no cracks. Just solid stone blocking the way. Each door has a hole in the centre, about 6 inches across, just big enough to stick a spear through. That's deliberate. You can defend the door from behind. Anyone trying to move it gets a spear in the face. But you can't reach through to unlock it, can't slip a tool through to roll it open. The doors only open from inside, that's crucial. There's no handle on the outside, no way to grip the stone, no way to get leverage. If you're in the tunnel and the door rolls shut, you're stuck. You're not getting through. Archaeologists found these doors at multiple levels, not just the entrance. Every major passage has one. Every connection between floors, every critical junction. The city is divided into segments. Each segment can be isolated. That's not normal defensive architecture. Castles have gates, walls have doors, but you don't seal off every hallway. You don't create dozens of separate zones, unless you expect to lose ground, unless you plan to retreat level by level. The doors tell a story. Someone enters the city. Maybe they breach the first level. You don't panic. You fall back, roll the door closed behind you. Now they're stuck. They can't follow. They can't break through 1,000 pounds of stone. They're trapped in a maze of empty rooms while you're safe below. But that's the thing. If it's just raiders, why would they follow you down? Raiders want livestock, grain, gold, things they can carry. They don't want to fight through 18 levels of underground passages for people hiding in the dark. The doors suggest a different threat, something that would follow you down, something that wouldn't stop at the surface, something that persistent. Look at the placement. The first door is about 50 feet from the main entrance. That's close. You get everyone inside, get them past the first checkpoint, seal it, fast. Then there's another door 100 feet deeper, then another, then another. 7 major doors between the surface and the lowest level, each one buying time, each one creating a barrier. The doors on the lower levels are different, heavier, thicker, better made. The ones near the surface are functional. The ones deep down are fortresses. Like they expected that if something got past the first few doors, the lower ones needed to hold no matter what. Some doors have additional features, stone bars that drop into place, secondary locks, reinforcement channels. These aren't just rolled shut, they're secured, barricaded, made permanent. Why? If you're hiding from an army, you don't need that. Armies don't have time to chip through stone doors. They move on. But if you're hiding from something else, something with patience, something that might wait, then every extra barrier matters. The doors at Kaimakli, the nearby complex, are similar. Same design, same weight, same one-way mechanism. At Oskanak they found doors with additional features, channels above them for pouring hot oil, murder holes in the ceiling, defensive positions. This is military engineering, sophisticated military engineering. Someone studied how to defend underground spaces, how to create choke points, how to turn passages into killing zones. The Romans wrote about defensive architecture. They had manuals, strategies, but they never wrote about this. They never described defending underground cities with rolling stone doors. This knowledge came from somewhere else, somewhere older. The doors show wear patterns, grooves in the tracks, marks on the stone. These doors were used, not once, many times, rolled closed, rolled open, closed again. The stone is polished smooth in places from repeated movement. That means the threat came back. Whatever they were hiding from, it wasn't a single event. It was recurring, predictable enough to build for, frequent enough to use the defences regularly. Some doors are stuck now, jammed in place. The tracks are blocked with debris. Archaeologists had to dig around them, had to excavate carefully to avoid damaging the mechanisms. When they finally cleared one door, they tried to move it. It still rolled. After thousands of years. The engineering still worked. That's precision. The tracks are perfectly level. The stone is perfectly round. The weight is balanced. You can roll these doors with one person, push from the inside. The door moves, seals the passage, locks you in, locks you in. That's the part that bothers me. These doors don't just keep things out, they keep you in. Once closed, you're committed, you're underground, you're sealed off from the surface, from fresh air, from sunlight, from the outside world. Who chooses that? Who says, yes, I'll take my family 200 feet underground and seal stone doors behind us? What has to be happening on the surface to make that the better option? The doors near living quarters are different from doors near storage areas. The living quarter doors are heavier, more secure, like they expected people to stay behind them for long periods, like those rooms needed to be the safest. There are small chambers next to some doors, guard posts. Someone sat there, watched the door, waited, ready to defend if something tried to break through, ready to sound an alarm if the door started to move. These chambers have carved benches, alcoves for oil lamps, weapon racks cut into the walls. This wasn't temporary duty. This was a post, someone's job. Someone spent hours, maybe days, watching a sealed stone door in the dark. Watching for what? What comes through a stone door? What needs a guard with a spear sitting in darkness behind 1,000 pounds of rock? The doors have one more feature. Small channels carved around the edges. Drainage. If water seeps past, it runs into these channels, flows away, doesn't pool, doesn't create pressure that might move the door. That's thinking ahead. That's understanding that you might be down here during rain, during snowmelt, during floods, and the door still needs to hold, still needs to seal, still needs to protect. Some doors show damage, scratches on the outside, marks where something tried to break through. Not siege weapons, not battering rams. The marks are wrong for that. They're scattered, random, like something clawed at the stone. Maybe that's just erosion. Maybe it's water damage. Maybe it's nothing. But when you stand in those passages, when you see those marks in the lamplight, they don't look like nothing. The doors are still there, still functional, still ready. If something happened today, if some threat emerged, you could roll those doors closed, seal yourself in, the city would work, the defences would hold. That's what keeps me awake. Not that ancient people built this, but that it still works, that the threat they prepared for might still be relevant, that these doors might still be needed, because they built this to last. built it for their children and their children's children. Built it like the danger was permanent. Built it like safety was temporary. The doors tell us that. Every 1,000-pound stone wheel says the same thing. Whatever they feared, they never stopped fearing it. Never felt safe enough to abandon these defences. Never said, "We don't need this anymore." They kept the doors maintained, kept the tracks clear, kept the mechanisms working, generation after generation, century after century. The doors stayed ready. That's not paranoia. That's memory. That's knowing something your descendants need to know. Something important enough to preserve in stone and engineering and defensive architecture that lasts forever. The doors are waiting, still, even now, ready to roll closed one more time. The passages between levels are designed to kill you. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, with calculation. Most tunnels at Derinkuyu are narrow, about 5 feet tall, maybe 3 feet wide. You can't stand up straight. You have to crouch, bend forward, move sideways in places. Your shoulders scrape the walls. That's intentional. A single defender can hold a narrow passage. One person with a spear controls the space. Attackers can't spread out, can't use numbers, can't overwhelm you with force. They have to come one at a time, and each one dies. The ceiling height changes constantly. You're walking hunched over. Then suddenly the ceiling drops. You have to crawl. Then it rises again. Then drops. This isn't random. This is tactical. When you're crawling, you're vulnerable. Your hands are on the ground. Your weapon is useless. Your head is down. Someone waiting around the corner has all the advantage. You can't see them, can't block, can't dodge. You just die. The passages twist. Sharp. Turns every 20 or 30 feet. You can't see what's ahead. Can't charge forward. Can't build momentum. Every corner is a potential ambush. Every turn might be your last. There are alcoves cut into the walls, small spaces, just big enough for one person to stand. These aren't decorative, they're fighting positions. Someone hides in the alcove. You walk past, they step out behind you. You never knew they were there. The floors slope, sometimes up, sometimes down, never flat for long. This wears you out, makes you tired, throws off your balance, and when you're tired and unbalanced, you make mistakes. Mistakes get you killed. Some passages have steps, carved directly into the rock, but the steps are irregular. Different heights, different depths. You can't find a rhythm, can't move quickly. You have to watch your feet, and while you're watching your feet, you're not watching ahead. The ventilation shafts create another problem. They run vertical through multiple levels, about 2 feet wide. If you're defending, you can drop things down these shafts. Rocks, boiling water, hot oil, whatever. The shaft carries it straight down to the level below. Anyone in the passage underneath gets hit. They can't see it coming, can't block it. The shaft is too narrow to climb, too smooth to grip. There are murder holes in some ceilings, small openings, just big enough to stick a spear through. You're walking down a passage. Someone above you thrusts down. The spear comes through the ceiling. You never saw them, never had a chance to defend. The passages connect in specific patterns, multiple routes between levels. But not all routes are equal. Some are obvious, wide, well lit. These are traps. The real defenders use the narrow passages, the hidden ones, the routes that twist and turn and make no sense. They know the maze, you don't. Dead ends exist throughout the city, passages that go nowhere. You follow a tunnel, it looks promising, then it just stops. Solid wall. Now you have to turn around, go back. And while you're backtracking, confused, frustrated, someone is waiting. The lighting makes everything worse. You're carrying torches, maybe oil lamps. The smoke fills the passages, gets in your eyes, makes you cough. The defenders don't need light. They know these tunnels by touch, by memory. They can move in complete darkness. You can't. Sound behaves strangely underground. Echoes bounce off walls. You hear footsteps but can't tell where they're coming from. Ahead, behind, above, below. The acoustics are disorienting, frightening. You're jumping at shadows, swinging at nothing. The temperature shifts create problems. Some levels are warm, some are cold. The changes affect your breathing, your stamina, your judgment. You're sweating in one passage, shivering in the next. Your body can't regulate, can't adapt. Water appears in unexpected places, puddles on the floor, dripping from ceilings. This isn't accidental drainage, these are designed obstacles. The water makes floors slippery, makes footing uncertain. You're already bent over in a narrow passage. Now you're trying not to slip, trying not to fall, and falling means dying. The stone doors divide the city into zones, but the zones aren't equal sizes. Some are large, some are tiny. The defenders can retreat through small zones quickly. Seal the door, move to the next level. Attackers get trapped in large zones, wandering, searching, finding nothing. There are false doors, stone wheels that look like the real defensive doors, but they don't go anywhere. They're just carved into walls. You waste time trying to open them, waste energy, waste hope. Meanwhile, the real door is somewhere else, and it's already closed. The deepest levels have the worst passages, narrower, lower, more twisted. By the time you fight down that far, you're exhausted. You've been underground for hours, maybe days. You're running out of supplies, running out of air, running out of will, and the passages keep getting harder. Some tunnels have loose stones in the ceiling, deliberately weakened. Defenders can collapse these tunnels, bury attackers alive, or just block the passage, force you to find another route, force you deeper into the maze. The chapel levels have strange acoustics. Sound carries differently. Voices echo in ways that make you think there are more defenders than there are. Make you think they're everywhere. Make you panic. Panic kills you underground. You start running, start making noise, start giving away your position. The defenders just wait. Listen. Follow the sound. Find you. The schoolrooms have low benches, stone desks. These become obstacles in a fight. You trip over them, bang into them in the dark. They slow you down. The defenders know where every bench sits. They move around them easily. You don't. Storage rooms create another tactical problem. They're filled with clay jars, grain sacks, supplies. You can't see through them, can't move through them. Quickly, defenders hide behind storage, pop out, attack, disappear. The animal pens add confusion. Some levels had livestock, sheep, goats, maybe chickens. The animals make noise, create movement. You think you see something. It's just a sheep. You relax. Then the spear comes. There's no good way to attack this place. You can't siege it. The water comes from deep underground. The food is stored inside. You can't starve them out. Can't thirst them out. Can't smoke them out. The ventilation system is too good. You can't flood it. The drainage channels prevent that. Water flows away. Doesn't pool. Doesn't rise. You can't dig around it. The rock is too hard. The city is too large. You'd need years, decades. And while you're digging, they're fine. Living normally, eating, sleeping, waiting. Your only option is to go in, fight through, level by level, passage by passage, door by door. And each level costs you men, costs you time, costs you morale. By the third level, your soldiers don't want to go deeper. By the fifth level, they're refusing orders. By the seventh level, you've lost. This is defensive architecture at its peak. Not castle walls, not moats, not towers. This is using the earth itself as a weapon. Using darkness. using confusion, using fear. Someone understood how to defend this space perfectly, how to turn every passage into a trap, every corner into an ambush, every level into a killing ground. They didn't just build a hiding place, they built a fortress, an underground fortress designed to bleed attackers dry, designed to make invasion impossible, designed to make the surface world irrelevant. Whatever they feared up there, down here they were safe, not because the enemy couldn't find them, because the enemy couldn't reach them, couldn't fight them, couldn't win. The passages prove that. Every narrow tunnel, every low ceiling, every twisted turn, every hidden alcove, every murder hole, every trap. This city was built by people who understood war, who'd fought, who'd lost, who'd learned, and who decided that next time the enemy would lose. The passages are still there, still narrow, still twisted, still deadly. If you walked in today, if you tried to fight through, you'd die just like ancient invaders died. The architecture doesn't care what century it is. The tactics still work. The traps still function. The maze still confuses. The darkness still frightens. That's the genius of it. They built something timeless, something that would protect their children and their children's children forever. The passages remember. Even if we've forgotten why, it's easy to focus on the stone and the tunnels, the physical side of Derinkuyu. But there's another side, the human side. The people who lived there weren't just builders or fighters. They were regular people, families, children, elders, and they spent months, maybe even years, underground. That does something to the mind. Even today, people struggle with life in small, closed spaces. Imagine going underground with no idea when you'd see sunlight again. Let's start with the basics. Humans need light. Our bodies are set to the cycle of day and night. It helps us sleep and wake up. It keeps our minds healthy. Down in Derinkuyu, real sunlight never reached the living areas. Only the uppermost levels got a tiny bit of natural light. The rest of the city was pitch black unless you lit it up with torches or lamps. The air was always thick with smoke and the smell of oil. Shadows danced on the walls. Faces flickered in and out of sight. After days or weeks, it was easy to lose track of time. Psychologists call this cave syndrome, when people are cut off from the outside world for too long. You get confused. You forget what day it is. Your body clock drifts. Some people get depressed. Others just get exhausted. Even modern miners with electric lights and good air can struggle. In Derinkuyu there was no electricity, just firelight, just darkness, and no clocks to help you count the hours. People living underground would have had to invent their own kind of time. Maybe they used meals or prayers. Maybe they listened for the sounds above, storms, thunder, footsteps. But most of the world was out of reach. The surface could be peaceful or burning with war, and you'd only know what you heard through stone. There's evidence that people tried to keep life as normal as possible. Archaeologists found schoolrooms with benches, places for kids to learn, chapels for worship, storage for food, even pens for animals. They carved out spaces that felt like home. But nothing really replaces the sky. You can't fake sunlight. You can't make up for fresh air. The body knows. The mind knows. Let's talk about what happens to people in closed spaces. There's a study from the 1960s. A French researcher named Michel Siffre spent months in a cave, cut off from time, no sun, no clocks. After a few weeks, he lost track of everything. He slept at random times, ate whenever. His sense of day and night fell apart. He got lonely. His mind played tricks on him. He even started hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. And that was one man in the modern era, with a plan and support. Now multiply that by thousands of people. Parents trying to keep their kids calm, old people missing the sun, young people itching to run, all of them stuck in a maze below the earth, listening for signs that they could go back up. Think about the noise. The city had to be full of sounds. Footsteps, voices, kids crying, animals bleating. Every sound would echo off stone. There's no soft furniture to soak up noise. No grass, no trees. Just hard walls and hard floors. Everything gets louder. Every argument, every laugh, every sigh. Some people would get used to it. Others might crack under the pressure. Let's not forget the smell. You have hundreds or thousands of people in close quarters, cooking, over oil lamps or small fires, storing food, keeping animals. No matter how good the ventilation, it's never going to smell fresh. You'd get used to sweat, smoke, and damp earth. Some days it might be hard to breathe, especially if you're deep in the lower levels. Then there's the fear. The city wasn't a vacation spot. People didn't go there for fun. They went because of danger. Maybe it was war. Maybe it was something else. Every day you'd listen for distant footsteps above. Every night you'd wonder if someone was trying to break in. Kids would ask questions. Parents would make up stories, or maybe tell the truth. Either way, stress would hang over everything. It's easy to imagine the panic when the city filled up. Picture the rush. Hundreds of people crowding the entrances, rolling shut the giant stone doors. Families separated in the chaos. People yelling, trying to find their children or parents. Once the doors closed, the outside world disappeared. You'd be alone with whoever made it in. Maybe you'd never see the sun again. Let's look at health. Underground living takes a toll on the body. Without sunlight, people can't make vitamin D. That leads to weak bones, sore muscles, and tiredness. Kids the most at risk. Growing bodies need sunlight. Without it, they get sick. Skin gets pale. Eyes struggle to adjust. Cuts and scrapes heal slowly in the dark and damp. There's not much room for exercise either. No fields to run. No room to stretch out. Just narrow passages and crowded rooms. People would get stiff. Muscles would waste away. Even standing up straight was hard in the low tunnels. Over time, people would get weaker, not stronger. What about food? The storage rooms held grain, dried fruit, maybe salted meat. But fresh food would run out fast. No gardens underground, no hunting, no foraging. After a while, meals would turn bland and small. Hunger grows, tempers shorten, people argue more. It's a pattern seen in every siege, every famine, every disaster. The same goes for water. The well system was brilliant, but it wasn't endless. If too many people crowded in, the water might run low. Or maybe the pumps broke. Maybe someone dropped a torch and started a fire. Disasters could happen in a heartbeat, and fixing them wasn't easy. Disease is another problem. Crowded together, germs spread fast. One cough, and dozens get sick. Underground, there's no sunlight to kill off bacteria, no wind to carry away smells. Simple illnesses could turn deadly. Archaeologists haven't found mass graves in Derinkuyu, but that doesn't mean people didn't die down there. Maybe they took bodies back to the surface when it was safe, or maybe they hid them deeper in the maze. Then there's the mental side. Psychologists today talk about cabin fever, that restless, trapped feeling you get after days cooped up. It turns into anger, or sadness, or numbness. People start snapping at each other. Little things get big. Fights break out. Some people retreat into silence. Others try to take charge. It's a test of patience and leadership. Stories from history back this up. During sieges, ancient writers describe people turning on each other. Neighbours stealing food, friends becoming enemies. Trust breaks down. Even in recent times, people trapped in mines or bunkers report the same thing. The longer you're trapped, the harder it is to stay hopeful. Let's not forget the children. Kids don't understand why they can't go outside, why the world is suddenly dark and crowded. Some get scared, others get bored. Parents try to distract them with games or lessons. The schoolrooms found in Derinkuyu show that people tried to keep up teaching. Maybe they sang songs or told stories by lamplight. Maybe they promised that things would be better soon. For the elderly, the stress must have been even worse. Old bones aren't made for crouching or crawling. Weak lungs don't handle smoke. Fears about family and the future must have weighed heavy. Some might never have made it back to the surface. Now, let's talk about the feeling of the unknown. Nobody knew how long they'd be underground. Was it days, weeks, months? Each hour stretched out. Every sound could mean hope or danger. People watched for any sign that it was safe to go up. Sometimes rumours would sweep through. The enemy is gone, or it's safe now. Maybe people rushed to the doors. Maybe they waited, afraid it was a trick. There's something haunting about that. Waiting in the dark, trusting that the world above would return to normal, but never really sure. Archaeologists think people might have lived in Derinkuyu for months at a time. Not all the time, but during long crises. That means people adapted somehow. They learned to live with fear, to make routines, to tell themselves it would end. Evidence of daily life shows up in little things. There are carvings on the walls, simple, patterns, marks left behind. Maybe they were counting days, maybe they were prayers or good luck signs. People left their mark, even in the dark. Some rooms have niches for lamps lined up along the walls. That suggests people spent long evenings together, sharing light, maybe telling stories. The chapels probably saw crowded prayers, people whispering for protection. In the schoolrooms, teachers scratched out lessons on stone. Kids practiced letters, maybe just to keep busy. Animal pens show that people brought goats, sheep, maybe chickens. The sound of animals would have been comforting, a reminder of the surface world, but also more mouths to feed, more noise, more mess. Let's pause a second. What would it feel like to wake up in complete darkness? No sunlight, no birds, just the drip of water and the shuffle of feet. You sit up, not sure what time it is. Someone nearby is snoring. A child cries. You light a lamp. The flame is tiny, barely holding back the night. That's your world day after day. People did what they had to do. They worked together, shared food, shared chores. Some days that brought them closer. Other days it drove them apart. Nobody got to be alone for long. Privacy was a dream. When the crisis passed, they returned to the surface. Some things must have felt new all over again. The sun too bright, the wind too sharp, the world too open. Maybe they blinked and laughed. Maybe they cried from relief. But the memory of darkness stayed with them. There's something in us that remembers old fears. The fear of the dark. The fear of being hunted or trapped. Derinkuyu is proof of that. People carved a whole city into the earth just to feel safe. They gave up the sky for safety, gave up comfort for survival. It makes you wonder what was so frightening outside. What danger was so big that people chose darkness over daylight? Why they were willing to trade freedom for safety even for a little while? Some people say humans can adapt to anything. Derinkuyu is the perfect test of that idea. People adapted to the maze, the dark, the fear. They found ways to keep going, to keep family together, to keep hope alive. But the scars must have stayed. Kids who grew up in the dark, parents who worried every night, friends lost or left behind. After each crisis, life went on. But the memory of the underground would linger. It's hard to know exactly how many times Derinkuyu was filled. Maybe it happened every few years, maybe only during the worst invasions. But each time, thousands of people went through the same thing, the same fear, the same hope. Today, when you walk through the tunnels as a tourist, it's easy to forget the human side. It feels like a maze, a puzzle. But for the people who lived there, it was life and death. Every choice mattered. Every day was a test. We know what war does to cities on the surface, but underground the pressure is different. It's a slow burn, a test of nerves and patience. Challenge to your sense of self. There's something both sad and powerful about that. People gave up everything they loved for a chance to survive, and they made it work, somehow. It's easy to look back and feel distant from these ancient people, but in some ways they're not so different from us. We worry, we hide, we wait for danger to pass, we find comfort where we can, we make up stories to explain the dark. In Derinkuyu, you see the best and the worst of humanity, the courage to dig deep, the fear that drives us to hide, the stubborn hope that things will get better. Maybe that's what we carry from this place, not just the memory of stone and tunnels, but the lesson that fear shapes us, that what we're willing to endure tells a story about who we are, and all this from a city hidden under a hill in Turkey, a place where the darkness still remembers what people tried to forget. The human cost is written in every stone, in every scraped wall, in every echo. This wasn't just architecture. It was survival, paid for in days of darkness and years of memory. And as we move from what they endured to why they built it in the first place, we start to see the outlines of the enemy, the first theory, the first whisper of what could have been so terrifying. People traded the sky for stone. When you try to picture ancient people in hiding, it's normal to think about war, raids, soldiers, armies on horseback. But there's another theory, a much bigger one. What if it wasn't just people they were hiding from? What if it was the entire environment turning against them? This isn't a story about kings or empires, it's about the world itself. The first whisper of something much larger, what some call a climate apocalypse. Let's lay it out. We know the Earth's climate has changed many times, not just ice ages, but sudden, sharp shifts. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast, faster than anyone expected. Volcanoes erupt, giant dust, storms block out the sun, crops fail, people panic. It's happened before, and it will happen again. Now, imagine you're living in ancient Cappadocia. The weather turns strange, summer turns cold, the sky gets dark even at noon. Crops don't grow the way they used to, birds disappear, rivers dry up or flood overnight. You look up, but the sun is just a pale circle behind grey clouds. Day after day, things get worse. Here's where the theory kicks in. Some researchers believe Derinkuyu and cities like it weren't only for war. They might have been built as a last defence against the sky itself, against disasters big enough to wipe out whole regions. Not just armies with swords, but months or years of darkness, hunger, and fear. Let's get into the science. Around the world there are layers of ash and dust in the ground. Archaeologists find them in places where nothing makes sense. In Cappadocia, in Italy, in China. These layers tell a story. Sometimes the story is a volcano. Other times it's a giant dust storm or a change in the wind that brings drought for years. One example is the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. That was more than 1,000 years after Derinkuyu was built, but it shows what can happen. Tambora blew its top in Indonesia. The ash spread around the globe. In 1816, people called it the year without a summer. Snow fell in June in America. Crops froze in July. People starved. The weather was broken. Everywhere. Now go back even further. There's evidence of ancient eruptions and climate disasters in Turkey too. One big eruption hit the region about 3,600 years ago. The volcano on the Greek island of Thera exploded. That's the same Thera people connect with the Atlantis story. The explosion was massive. It sent ash across the Mediterranean, into Turkey, Egypt, and beyond. Scientists found layers of this ash in places where people lived. After the eruption, The weather changed for years. Crops failed. People left. Their homes, societies collapsed. So here's the idea. When the sky turns dark and the world gets cold, life above ground becomes dangerous. Crops won't grow. Animals die. People get desperate. In those moments, an underground city isn't just smart. It's life or death. It's not just volcanoes. Sometimes the problem is drought that lasts for decades. Sometimes it's flooding or sudden freezing winters. Ancient records from China, Egypt and Mesopotamia all talk about times when the weather changed overnight. There are stories of black rain, red skies, and winters that never ended. Those aren't just myths. Scientists found real evidence. Tree rings, ice cores, and mud layers that show sudden, sharp climate changes going back thousands of years. Let's pause for a second. Imagine you're a farmer in ancient Turkey. You wake up one morning and the air smells strange. The sun is orange, not yellow. The wind is cold even though it's supposed to. Be summer. You check your fields and the wheat is stunted. The animals are restless. No birds are singing. Your children are hungry. Every day things get a little worse. You pray for rain, but nothing happens. Or maybe it rains too much and the rivers turn to mud. Either way, you're trapped. Now word spreads. People in the next village are leaving. They say the rivers are gone, or the forest is on fire, or the sky is raining ash. You hear stories about people starving, or whole towns wiped out by disease. You don't know what's true. All you know is the world outside isn't safe anymore. This is where Derinkuyu makes sense in a new way. If you can't count on the sky, you have to look underground. The earth is steady. The temperature stays the same. The wind can't reach you. The ash can't fall on your head. If you store enough grain, you can wait out the disaster. If you have a well, you can drink clean water, even if the rivers are poisoned with ash or mud. People might have gone below, not because of enemies with swords, but because the world outside was dying. They brought their animals, their children, their old people. They sealed the doors and waited. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, maybe longer. There's another piece to this puzzle. In the middle of Derinkuyu, there are storage rooms everywhere. Not just for food, but for water, oil, and tools. There are places for animals. There's even space for making wine and pressing olives. This isn't just a hiding place, it's a survival bunker. A place to ride out the end of the world, whether that means war or weather. Let's talk about the evidence for climate collapse in history. Around 1200 BCE, something called the Bronze Age collapse hit the eastern Mediterranean. It wasn't just one country. Whole empires fell apart. Hittites, Mycenaeans, Egyptians, and more. Cities burned. Trade stopped. Writing disappeared in some places. For a long time, people blamed war. But now, scientists found evidence of a massive drought at the same time. Tree rings from old trees show years of no rain. Pollen in the ground shows fields turned to dust. The drought lasted for decades. Food ran out. Societies broke down. People moved in huge waves. Refugees flooded into new lands. Some fought. Some begged for help. Some just vanished. In Egypt, there are records of people from the sea arriving in boats, starving and desperate. It was chaos everywhere. In this kind of world, an underground city is more than just a smart idea. It's a lifeline. You can't farm. You can't hunt. But if you have stored food and water, you might survive until the world recovers. Now, some people wonder why you'd go to all that effort. Why not just move somewhere else? But think about it. In a regional disaster, there's nowhere to go. Every village is struggling. Every river is dry. If you leave, you risk dying on the road. If you stay, you can at least control your chances. Underground, you can ration food. You can control who comes in. You can keep your family safe. There are other clues. Ancient stories from the Middle East, Greece, and even India talk about times of darkness. Myths about the sun going away, or endless winter, or the sky turning to stone. At first, those sound like fairy tales, but when you line them up with the science, they start to look like memories of climate disaster. Maybe the stories got twisted over time, but the fear is real. Let's look at another example. In 536 CE, a mysterious fog covered Asia and Europe. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun shone without brightness like the moon. It lasted for more than a year. Summer turned cold. Crops failed. People starved by the thousands. Scientists now know this was probably caused by a huge volcanic eruption, maybe in Iceland or North America. Dust and ash circled the globe, blocking sunlight. It was the coldest decade in more than 2,000 years. People back then didn't know about volcanoes on the other side of the world. All they knew was the sun was gone and the world was broken. Some records talk about people hiding wherever they could. Caves, cellars, anything to get out of the cold and the dark. Epidemics followed. Whole towns disappeared. Back to Derinkuyu. The city's design makes sense if you're planning for the worst. The air shafts aren't just for comfort. They're for survival, keeping fresh air when the outside is full of ash or smoke. The wells are deep, reaching water that can't be poisoned from above. The storage rooms are huge, enough for a big group to wait out a disaster, and there's more. The tunnels connect to other underground cities miles away. That means you could move from one to another without going outside. If one city ran low on food, maybe you could trade with another. If fire or ash blocked the entrance, you could escape through a different city. That's advanced planning. Some researchers wonder how people could organize all this. It takes a lot of work to dig tunnels, move stone, store food, and plan for years of hiding. But if your life depends on it, you find a way. Maybe the community worked together, everyone doing their part. Maybe there were leaders who remembered old disasters and said, "We're not getting caught unprepared again." Let's talk about the mindset. Imagine growing up with stories from your grandparents about the time the sky turned black, about years when nothing grew, about people who didn't make it. You'd want to be ready. You'd want your children to be safe no matter what happened. This kind of fear doesn't go away. It gets passed down. You carve it into stone. You make sure there's always enough food set aside. You teach your kids how to survive in the dark. You build doors that no enemy or disaster can break through. There are even theories that some underground cities started as small shelters, then grew, bigger every time disaster struck. Maybe the first level was just a cave. After the first bad year, they dug deeper. After the next disaster, they added more rooms. Over generations, the city grew into the maze we see today. What about the animals? Some people say the pens were just for food, but others think they were for survival. Goats and sheep give milk and meat, but they also give warmth. In a freezing world, animals kept underground would help keep everyone alive. Their breath warms the air. Their bodies give comfort. People and animals together, making it through the long, dark months. Let's not forget disease. In a world where the weather is broken, sickness spreads fast. Cold, hungry people get sick more easily. Underground, you can close the doors and keep out strangers. You control who comes in. You keep your group small, your food clean, your water safe. That's how you survive when everyone else is desperate. Here's another angle. Some say the underground cities were part of a larger network, maybe dozens of cities, all hidden below the ground. If one group ran out of food, they could send a message through the tunnels. Maybe they even had a system for trading goods underground, far from the dangers above. Some tunnels go for miles, connecting cities that are now just ruins. It's hard to know how much of that is true, but it's possible. Let's pull back for a moment. This theory isn't just about Derinkuyu. All over the world, people built underground shelters. In China, there are yaodongs, homes dug into hillsides to keep out the cold. In Malta, there are catacombs. In Scotland, there are souterrains, stone tunnels built by ancient farmers. In each place, the reason is different. Sometimes war, sometimes weather, but always the same fear. What if the world outside turns deadly? The climate apocalypse theory doesn't have all the answers. There's no ancient diary saying, "We built this because the sky turned black." But when you put together the evidence, the ash layers, the stories, the rooms full of storage, it starts to fit. People don't build giant underground cities for fun. They don't spend years digging just because they're bored. It takes something big, something terrifying. If you were living back then, you'd want to be ready for anything: war, plague, famine, fire, flood. But nothing is as frightening as the world itself turning against you. When the sun goes away and the crops die, all you have left is each other and whatever you've stashed away in the dark. There's something powerful about that, something almost hopeful. People didn't give up. They found ways to survive. They planned for the unthinkable. They carved out a future even when the world above was falling apart, and when the sky finally cleared, when the sun came back, they climbed out of the darkness and started again. Maybe that's the real lesson of Derinkuyu. Not just fear, but hope. The idea that even in the worst times, people look for a way through. We don't know exactly what disaster drove people underground in Cappadocia. Maybe it was war. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe both at once. But the climate apocalypse theory gives us a bigger picture. A reminder that the Earth itself can be an enemy. And that sometimes survival means going deeper, hiding from the sky, waiting for the world to heal. Now, let's step even further back in time, before written history, before cities, before even the first stories. Because the oldest explanations for hiding underground don't come from science or weather reports. They come from myth, legend, and the ancient texts themselves. Long before scientists tracked volcanoes or measured rainfall, people tried to make sense of disasters in their own way. They didn't have weather reports or geology books. All they had was stories. And sometimes, stories are the only clues we get. So what did people say about the world turning against them? About darkness, cold, and hunger? They explained it through myths, legends, and sacred texts. These stories were passed down for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. Some were carved in stone, others whispered around fires. Over time, they changed. But the old fear stayed the same. Let's start with the oldest stories we know. In ancient Mesopotamia, where writing first appeared, people told tales of floods, storms, and darkness. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written over 4,000 years ago, describes a flood that covers the whole world. The hero survives by building a giant boat. It sounds familiar, right? The details are different from the story of Noah, but the idea is the same. The world ends in water. Only a few survive, but it wasn't just floods. There are stories about darkness too. In Egypt, the Book of the Dead talks about a night that lasted days. The sun god, Ra, battles through the underworld, fighting monsters to bring back the dawn. Every morning, people hoped he'd win. Sometimes they wondered if he wouldn't. In Greece, there's the myth of Persephone. She's taken into the underworld, and while she's gone, the world freezes. Nothing grows. The earth itself mourns. Only when she returns does spring come back. This isn't just a story about seasons. It's a memory of what happens when the world stops working. Go farther east, and you find similar themes. In India, the Mahabharata and other old texts mention times when the sun didn't rise, or the skies rained fire. In China, ancient poems tell of heaven's anger. times when the sky turned red or black, when crops failed and people went hungry. Why do so many stories from different places talk about the same things? Floods, darkness, endless winter, the sun vanishing, the world growing cold. Maybe they all just made up similar tales. Or maybe people everywhere remembered real disasters, but explained them in the only way they could. Some researchers think these stories are memories of real events, volcanoes, dust storms, long droughts. If you're living through chaos and don't know why, you look for answers. Sometimes the only answer is a story. Let's dig deeper into a few of these tales. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest stories we have. It's from around 2100 BCE. In it, the gods decide to wipe out humanity with a flood. Only one man, Utnapishtim, is warned. He builds a boat, saves his family and animals, and survives when the world drowns. When the waters go down, life starts over. This isn't just a story about water, it's about fear. Imagine your whole world getting washed away. Fields, villages, even the sun hidden by clouds. The only way to explain it is that someone powerful, maybe a god, must be angry. The flood becomes a lesson, a warning. Don't anger the gods, or the world will end. Jump to Egypt. The Book of the Dead isn't a single story, it's more like a guidebook for the afterlife, but scattered through it are hints of real disasters. There's talk of darkness lasting so long that people start to panic. The sun god Ra is attacked by a giant serpent called Apophis. Every night Ra has to fight this monster. If he loses, the sun won't rise. To ancient Egyptians, this wasn't just a bedtime story. It was a way to explain why sometimes the sun seemed weak, or why storms and darkness came out of nowhere. Maybe after a big volcano, when ash covered the sky, people thought Apophis had won, that the world was ending. Greece gives us the story of Persephone and Demeter. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest. Her daughter, Persephone, is kidnapped by Hades and taken to the underworld. While Persephone is gone, nothing grows. Demeter grieves, and the earth goes cold and dead. When Persephone returns, spring comes back. It's a cycle: loss, darkness, return, and hope. On the surface, it's about seasons. But think about what happens if winter lasts too long. If spring never comes, crops fail, people starve, and the old stories suddenly feel real. Maybe this myth started when something actually did go wrong with the seasons. In India, the Mahabharata is full of strange weather and disasters. There are tales of years without rain, dust storms that block out the sun, rivers running dry, or the sky turning red. Sometimes gods are blamed. Other times, it's just fate. But the message is the same. The world can change in an instant, and people need to be ready. China's old poems and stories also talk about times when heaven is angry. The sky turns dark, the rivers flood or disappear, famines follow. Sometimes these stories mix in with real history. Chinese historians kept detailed records. They wrote about years of darkness, red dust, and black rain. Sometimes we can match these stories to real volcanoes or droughts. So, what do all these stories have in common? They're not just about magic or gods. They're about survival. They're warnings. If the world can turn on you without warning, you need to find a way to survive. Sometimes that means going underground, literally and in stories. Let's look at another example. In the Bible, the story of Noah's Ark is famous. God decides to flood the world to punish people. Noah builds a boat, saves his family and animals, and waits for the flood to end. When it does, life starts again. It's almost the same as the story from Mesopotamia. Two separate cultures, but the same fear. Water can destroy everything. Why is this important for Derinkuyu? because the people who lived in Cappadocia wouldn't have had science to explain disaster. They would have had stories, passed down from their parents and grandparents. Stories about the sun vanishing, the world freezing, or the ground itself turning deadly. When things went wrong, people often thought it was punishment or fate. Some myths are even more direct. In Turkey, there are old legends about the sleeping earth. These stories talk about times when the world above became deadly, and only those who went below survived. Sometimes, the stories say people hid from monsters. Other times, from the wrath of the gods. Always, it's the same idea. Underground is safety. These stories aren't unique to Turkey. In Northern Europe, there are tales of the dark winter and the long night. In Scandinavia, they called it Fimble Winter, a winter so long and cold that it killed almost everyone. After Fimble Winter, the old world ended and a new one began. It's a myth, but maybe it started with a real disaster. Even in North America, some native groups have stories about the long darkness, a time when the sun stopped shining and people hid wherever they could, sometimes in caves or deep in the earth. When the sun finally returned, the world was changed. So what's the pattern? The same fears keep popping up. Floods, darkness, endless winter, fire from the sky. People everywhere try to explain what they saw. Sometimes those stories help them survive. Now let's connect this back to Derinkuyu. Imagine growing up with these kinds of stories. Your parents tell you about the time the sky went black for a year, or when the rivers ran backward, or when the earth shook and towns vanished. You'd believe that disaster could come at any time. You'd want to be ready. Maybe you'd start digging. Maybe your whole community would. Over generations, the stories would turn into action. Myths would become blueprints. You'd build not just for yourself, but for everyone who came after you. The stories would remind you, don't take the surface for granted. Safety is below. Some researchers think that's why so many ancient cities have legends about the underworld. It wasn't just a place for the dead. It was a place to hide when the world above was too dangerous. Maybe these stories started as memories of real people hiding in caves, then grew into myths about gods and monsters. There are even stories that seem to remember the building itself. In some Turkish legends, people talk about cities below the earth, built by giants or ancient kings. Some say these cities were made as a gift from the gods. Others say they were punishment, places to hide from divine anger. Of course, it's hard to prove any of this. Myths aren't history. But here's the thing. They often hold a kernel of truth. If the same kinds of stories show up in different places, maybe they're based on something real. Let's look at what scholars call cultural memory. It's the idea that stories can remember things even when people forget the details. For example, the story of a great flood might start with a real river overflowing. Over time, the story grows. It becomes a myth about the whole world drowning. But it started with something people actually saw. In the same way, tales of darkness and endless winter might remember times when volcanoes erupted, or when the weather broke for years. People might not know why it happened, but they remembered how it felt. That's why these stories matter. They help explain why people built things like Derinkuyu. If you believe that disaster can strike at any time, and you've heard stories about people surviving by going underground, you're more likely to do the same. There's another layer here. Myths are not just warnings, they're also instructions. They teach people what to do. When the sky turns black, go below. When the world floods, climb into a boat. When winter never ends, hide somewhere warm and safe. Ancient texts sometimes spell this out. In Mesopotamia, there are old clay tablets that list instructions for surviving disasters. They talk about storing grain, collecting water, keeping animals close by. Some even mention safe houses or hidden places where people should gather during storms or floods. In China, records from over 2,000 years ago talk about earth houses, places dug into the hillside safe from wind and weather. These weren't just homes, they were shelters for bad times. People remembered the stories and prepared. So when we look at Derinkuyu, we're not just seeing a city, we're seeing the end result of thousands of years of fear, memory and planning. Myths told people what was possible. Stories gave them ideas, and each generation added something new, another room, another tunnel, another layer of protection. Myths can even shape how people organize their lives. If your stories say the world might end, you make sure you're not caught off guard. Maybe you keep extra food. Maybe you teach your kids how to find water. Maybe you build doors that only open from the inside. All of this gets passed down. Over time, the stories and the buildings blend together. People remember the myth, but they live in the reality. They might not know why their ancestors started digging, but they know it's important. There's one last piece to this puzzle. Some myths talk about enemies, not just from the sky or the earth, but from other people. Sometimes the disaster is war. Sometimes it's invaders. The lines blur. Is the darkness from a volcano or from an army burning your fields? Is the flood from the gods or from a broken dam? Myths mix everything together. That's why it's so hard to know for sure what drove people underground. The stories tell us about floods, darkness, endless winter, and monsters. But they also talk about enemies outside the gates. Maybe the truth is a mix of all these fears. What I love about this mystery is that it shows how deeply stories can shape real life. Myths aren't just old fairy tales, they're survival guides. They're reminders of what can go wrong and what people can do about it. So when you look at Derinkuyu, try to see both sides. The hard stone and the stories carved into memory. The engineering and the old fears. Every tunnel might be a response to a real disaster. Or it might be an answer to a story told around a fire late at night when the wind howls outside. People have always tried to make sense of the unknown. Sometimes they use science, sometimes they use stories. Both paths lead to the same place, trying to survive, to protect what matters, to find hope even in the darkest times. The underground cities of Cappadocia are proof. Myths and memory, working together, built something that lasted, something that still stands thousands of years later. But myths weren't the only explanation. As time went on, people wrote down new reasons for hiding below. Some pointed to enemies, not just disasters. They said it wasn't the sky or the gods. They said it was other humans. And that's a whole new theory. So let's get into the other side of the Derinkuyu mystery, the human threat. We've talked about disasters from nature, floods, darkness, endless winters, but what about danger from other people? That's a whole different kind of fear. Imagine living in a world where you never really know who might show up over the next hill. Maybe it's a trading partner, maybe it's a raiding party. There are no national borders, no police, and no one to call for help. If a group of strangers rides in, you have two choices: trust or run. And here's something true about early human history. War and violence aren't new. They've been with us since the beginning. Some of the oldest skeletons ever found show signs of battle wounds, skulls with cuts from axes, broken bones that healed uneven. People were fighting each other long before they built cities or wrote down laws. Why fight? Sometimes it was about food, sometimes water, sometimes land. Sometimes it was just because you were different. It didn't take much to spark conflict. If your group had more resources, you were a target. If you lived near a river, someone wanted it. If you grew better crops, someone wanted those too. Now think about Cappadocia. It's a strange place, full of valleys, hidden caves, and sudden cliffs. It's perfect for hiding, but it's also perfect for attacking. Armies could appear with little warning. Raiders could sneak up, disappear, and strike again. You couldn't see far. You heard rumours before you saw danger. So what's the evidence for people being the biggest threat? For a start, nearly every ancient culture has stories about invaders. Not just the big empires, but smaller groups too. There's a reason city walls exist. There's a reason people built forts, towers, and secret escape tunnels. When archaeologists dig up old settlements, they often find signs of sudden destruction. Burned houses, broken pottery, arrowheads stuck in walls. Sometimes entire villages were wiped out, and it wasn't always strangers. Sometimes your own neighbours turned against you if times got tough. Let's look at some examples. Around 1200 BCE, something called the Bronze Age collapse happened. In the space of a few decades, dozens of cities across the Mediterranean were destroyed. Not just one or two, over 40 cities gone. Palaces burned, writing stopped, trade ended. Nobody knows exactly why. Maybe it was climate change, maybe it was invaders, maybe both. But there are letters from that time written on clay tablets calling for help. The enemy is at the gates, the city is burning, we can't hold out. That kind of fear spreads. It doesn't just stay in one place. If your neighbour's city is attacked, you start to worry about your own. Maybe you build a wall, maybe you dig a hiding place, maybe you go one step further, like the people of Derinkuyu, and build a whole city underground. But why go to such extremes? Why not just build a bigger wall, or move somewhere safer? Here's where it gets interesting. Walls can be climbed, gates can be broken. If the enemy is ruthless, they'll find a way in. But stone deep underground is different. You can hide, you can wait, you can survive until the threat moves on. Look at the way Derinkuyu is built. It's not just a shelter, it's a fortress designed to keep out people who know what they're doing. The stone doors, the traps, the narrow passages, all of it is about defense against other humans. Animals don't try to break down doors, only people do. There's another clue in how the city is organized. The rooms are clustered in ways that make defense easy. There are places where a small group could hold off a much larger force. There are hidden storage spaces, secret escape routes, and even dead ends designed to confuse anyone who doesn't know the layout. That's not just for comfort. That's for survival against a thinking, planning enemy. Let's talk about the kinds of enemies they might have faced. Over the centuries, Cappadocia was invaded by Hittites, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Mongols, and many smaller groups. Each new wave brought new dangers. Sometimes it was an army looking to conquer. Sometimes it was bandits looking for loot. Each group had its own tactics, weapons, and reasons for attacking. But it didn't take a massive army to make people afraid. Sometimes just the rumour of trouble was enough. Stories spread faster than facts. If you heard about a village being wiped out a few valleys over, you wouldn't wait for proof. You'd get ready. You'd make sure your family could disappear in minutes if needed. What makes Derinkuyu special is its scale. This wasn't a few families hiding in a cave. This was a whole community, maybe up to 20,000 people, ready to vanish underground. That takes planning on a huge scale. It takes trust and cooperation too. Everyone had to agree on the plan. Everyone had to know what to do when the warning came. The warning itself is another mystery. How did they know when to hide? Some researchers think there were watchers on the hills ready to sound the alarm. Maybe a bell, maybe a horn, maybe a runner with a message. The city had multiple entrances, all hidden or disguised. People could slip underground and seal themselves in, leaving no trace on the surface. The entrances themselves tell a story. Some are hidden in the bottoms of wells. Others are disguised as animal pens or storage huts. There are even tunnels that start inside churches or monasteries. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never find them. This wasn't just good luck. It was careful, deliberate design. People learning from experience, making sure they weren't discovered. Now, let's talk about what happened once everyone was inside. Sealing the doors wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. You had to be quiet. No smoke drifting out of vents. No noise from children or animals. If an enemy was searching above, you couldn't give yourself away. The city was built to muffle sound. Air shafts twisted and turned to keep voices from carrying. Water was drawn from deep wells, not from streams or rivers that outsiders could poison or watch. There's something else here. Paranoia, but also hope. People didn't just build for one threat. They built for many. Maybe the enemy would break in. Maybe they'd try to smoke you out or starve you. The city was built to survive months of siege. There were storage rooms for grain, water, and supplies. Places to keep animals alive, even rooms for worship and school, so life could go on as normally as possible, but it wasn't a perfect system. Living underground for weeks or months would have been hard. Food would run low, tempers would flare, disease could spread. Some researchers think there were strict rules about who could enter, how much food was saved, and how everything was shared. If you broke the rules, you put everyone at risk. Let's turn to the bigger picture. Why did people think other humans were such a threat? Some of it was history. If your grandparents had survived an attack by hiding, you'd remember their story, you'd pass it down. Over time, the fear turned into tradition. When danger comes, we go below. It becomes part of the culture. There's also power in numbers. If enough people believe the same thing, it shapes how everyone acts. Maybe you'd rather stay on the surface, but if your whole town is heading underground, you go too. Fear becomes a group survival tool. Sometimes it keeps you safe. Sometimes it just keeps you together. Now, let's look at a few other places where people built underground to escape other humans. In Malta, there are ancient tunnels and shelters, some over 6,000 years old. In China, the Yodong cave homes served as shelter during wars and invasions. Even during World War II, people in London slept in subway tunnels to avoid bombs. The idea isn't unique to Cappadocia, but the scale and planning of Derinkuyu is rare. So how do we know these underground cities were built for human threats, not just natural disasters? Archaeologists look for clues. They find weapons, not just tools for farming. They find signs of quick construction, rooms carved in a hurry, with less care for decoration. Sometimes there are bodies, buried in hidden corners, showing signs of violence. There's also the timing. Many underground cities in Cappadocia grew during times of war. When records show armies marching nearby, new tunnels appear. When peace returns, construction slows down. It's a pattern found in other places too. Danger above leads to digging below. But here's where things get complicated. Sometimes enemies and disasters happen at the same time. A drought can make neighbours desperate. A famine can turn friends into raiders. The line between natural threat and human threat can blur. Survival means being ready for both. What about the psychological side? Living with the constant fear of attack changes people. It shapes how they raise their children. It affects how they trust outsiders. Sometimes it even affects what they believe about the world. Some old stories from Turkey talk about the people below as different from those above. Maybe it was just a way of saying, we survived because we stuck together. Let's look at the evidence for how often these cities were actually used as hiding places. Some researchers think people only went underground a few times in their lives, maybe once a decade when real danger came. Others say it may have been more regular, almost like a drill. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The cities were too well designed to be used just once and forgotten. People knew the routines. Children grew up knowing the back routes and secret doors. There's another angle to consider, the idea of deterrence. Maybe the very existence of Derinkuyu was a warning. If an enemy knew your town could disappear in minutes, maybe they'd move on to an easier target. Maybe they'd leave you alone. In a world without strong governments, sometimes the best defense is making yourself hard to find. Let's not forget the role of trust inside these underground cities. You had to believe your neighbour wouldn't betray you. You had to trust that the person in charge knew what they were doing. One mistake, a door left open, a careless word to an outsider, and the whole city could be at risk. So what does all this tell us about human nature? We're creative, but we're also careful. We plan for the worst. We build things that seem impossible because we want to protect what matters most. Family, friends, community. And we're willing to change the world around us, literally carving into the earth if that's what it takes to stay safe. There's a lesson here about fear. It can be destructive, but it can also drive people to do amazing things. Fear of other humans made the builders of Derinkuyu more cautious, more inventive, and maybe even more united. But it also meant living with anxiety. Every sound above might be a friend or an enemy. Every season brought new risks. You never really knew what tomorrow would bring. Some people might see all this and think it's just about hiding. But there's more to it. It's about refusing to give up, about facing danger and saying, we'll find a way. And that's powerful. What I love about this mystery is how it shows both sides of human nature. We're fragile, but we're also stubborn. We're scared, but we don't just sit and wait for disaster. We act, we build, we plan for a future, even if it means going underground. Now compare this to how people act today. We still build shelters, we still plan for emergencies. The details have changed, but the feelings are the same. The need to protect, to prepare, to hope for better times. In the end, the theory that people built Derinkuyu to hide from other humans is just as strong as the theory about natural disasters. Maybe it was both. Maybe one threat led to another. Maybe the city's greatest strength was that it could handle anything: flood, famine, war, or invasion. And here's something else. Even after centuries, we're still asking the same questions. Why did they build it? What scared them enough to go below? What did they hope to find deep in the earth that they couldn't find on the surface? Maybe the answer is simple. Maybe it's just the basic human need to feel safe, to control a little piece of the world, even when everything else is out of control. As you think about Derinkuyu and the people who built it, remember this. Fear isn't just something that holds us back. Sometimes it's what moves us forward. And maybe, just maybe, that's why these underground cities still matter. They remind us that no matter how dark things get, we always look for a way out. Or, in this case, a way down. Next, let's look at something surprising. Why living underground, for all its risks, might have actually felt comforting. Why people didn't just hide below, but sometimes chose to stay there long after the danger passed. Picture yourself deep underground, sealed away from the world above. Stone walls on every side, no sunlight, just cool, steady darkness. At first, it sounds terrifying, right? But what if for some people, this was actually the safest place they knew? What if being in the earth wasn't just about hiding from danger, but about finding a kind of peace? Let's look at the evidence for what life was actually like down in the rock. Not just the fear of attack or the panic of running from disaster, but the everyday reality, the routines, the small comforts people found in the belly of the earth. First, think about temperature. On the surface, Cappadocia can swing from freezing winters to blazing hot summers. That's rough if you're living in a simple home, exposed to the wind and weather. Underground, it's different. The temperature barely changes. Even now, the tunnels of Derinkuyu stay around 55 degrees Fahrenheit all year. No matter what's happening above, it's always the same below. This matters more than you'd think. If you spend weeks or months below ground, having steady warmth and coolness is a huge relief. You don't have to worry about frostbite or heat stroke. You don't lose sleep shivering or sweating. The earth itself is like a giant natural blanket. Now, let's talk about sound. Above ground, danger can come from anywhere. Hoofbeats, shouting, thunder, barking dogs, the crack of branches, each one could mean trouble. But underground, it's quiet. The walls block most outside noise. You can hear the drip of water, the shuffle of feet, maybe distant voices, but it's muffled, safe. You're less likely to be surprised by something sneaking up on you. Some people might think this kind of silence would drive you crazy, and sometimes it probably did. But there's another side to it. In a world full of chaos, silence can be a comfort. It gives you space to think and breathe. Down in the earth, you control what you hear. You decide who gets close. You choose when to speak and when to be still. There's more, though. Let's look at community. On the surface, it's easy to drift apart. Fields are far away. Neighbours are scattered. Danger can split people up. But underground, everyone is together. Tight quarters mean you see the same faces, day after day. You share meals, chores, stories. You depend on each other in ways that don't always happen above ground. Archaeologists found evidence of this togetherness in Derinkuyu. There are rooms for gathering, big halls where people likely ate and talked. There are chapels carved into the rock with simple altars. There are schools where children learn from elders. There are even spaces for animals kept safe from harm. All of this points to a life that wasn't just about survival. It had structure, it had rhythm, it had hope. Let's get into the details. The kitchens are one example. They're not placed near the main tunnels. Instead, they're tucked away, close to air shafts. Why? Because smoke is dangerous. If it drifts above, it gives away your hiding place. But if you vent it carefully, the city stays secret. People learn to cook with as little smoke as possible. They probably ate simple food, grains, dried meat, maybe a few root vegetables. Nothing fancy, but enough to get by. There's also storage. Grain bins carved right into the stone, jars sealed with wax or clay. These are signs of planning. You don't store food for months unless you expect to need it. You don't build big storage rooms unless you trust your neighbours not to steal in the dark. It's a balance. Fear outside, trust inside. Now think about light. Torches and oil lamps were used, but not all the time. Oil was precious. Too much fire uses up oxygen and fills the air with smoke, so people learn to live in a dimness. Your eyes adjust. You know every step by heart. Maybe you even start to like the soft glow, the way it hides wrinkles and shadows. There are signs that people decorated these spaces too. Simple carvings on walls, crosses and other symbols scratched into doorways. These weren't just for beauty. They marked spaces, told stories, gave comfort. Even underground, humans bring art with them. We want to make the world feel like home, even when it's carved from stone. Now, here's something you might not expect. Some people actually chose to live underground, even when they didn't have to. There are stories from local families who used the tunnels during peaceful times. Maybe it was cooler in summer, or safer for children. Maybe it was just tradition. Over time, the underground became part of life, not just an emergency plan. That's not just a Cappadocia thing. Across the world, you find similar habits. In China, millions of people still live in yaodong, earth, homes dug into hillsides. In Tunisia, the Berber people built underground houses to escape desert heat. In Malta, old cave dwellings became permanent homes. Even in Australia, the mining town of Coober Pedy has people living below ground to escape the burning sun. So, why does this matter? Because it shows that living below isn't always a last resort. Sometimes it's a choice. a way to make life easier, calmer, or just different. The line between hiding and living gets blurry. Let's look at how people kept themselves busy underground. You can't just sit and wait all day. There's work to do, food to prepare, water to carry, children to look after. People probably played games, told stories, sang songs. Maybe they kept pets, or watched over small gardens grown under lamps. There's even evidence that some rooms were used for brewing wine or beer. Life finds a way, even in the dark. What about health? Being underground isn't easy. There's less sunlight. That means less vitamin D, which can cause problems over time. Some people might have gotten pale or sickly. There's also the risk of mold, bad air, or cramped quarters spreading illness. But there are signs people managed. The air shafts kept things fresh. Wells brought clean water. Waste was carried out through hidden tunnels or stored in special rooms. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, most of the time. Children grew up knowing these spaces. They learned to move quietly, to find their way in the dark. Maybe they even played hide and seek, using the tunnels as their playground. For them, this world wasn't scary. It was normal. And there's something else. Rituals. When the world is unstable, rituals keep people steady. Underground chapels, prayer rooms, and spaces for meditation show that people brought their beliefs with them. They didn't just wait for danger to pass. They looked for meaning. They hoped. They kept faith alive. Even in the deepest dark, let's talk about the sense of safety. On the surface, you never know what's coming. A storm, a stranger, a wild animal. Underground, you control the doors. You choose when to open and close them. You decide who enters, who stays, who leaves. That control is rare in ancient life. Even kings can't stop a flood, but a family can close a stone door. This control brings a sense of peace. It's like building a world within the world, a space where the rules are yours. For a while at least, you get to decide what happens. There's a kind of comfort in the earth itself. Some people today feel anxious in open spaces but calm in closed ones. The weight of stone above feels protective, not crushing. It's like being wrapped up tight, shielded from the wildness outside. Maybe for ancient people this feeling was even stronger. Now let's talk about time. Underground, time changes. There's no sunrise or sunset. Days blur together. People had to invent new ways to mark time. Maybe it was meals, rituals, or just the feeling in their bones. Some archaeologists think people used water clocks, simple bowls that filled and emptied at steady rates to keep track of hours. Others say it came down to routine. You do what needs to be done when it needs doing. This timelessness can be soothing. Above ground, you race the sun. Below, you move at your own pace. No rush, nothing chasing you. Just the slow, steady rhythm of life beneath the earth. Let's not ignore the hard parts. Living underground wasn't easy. Tempers could flare. Space was tight. Secrets were hard to keep. But there are signs people managed conflict. Some rooms are set apart, maybe for elders, leaders, or people who needed quiet. There are council spaces where decisions were likely made. Even in the dark, humans find ways to organize, to lead, to follow. Here's another angle, the idea of memory. When people came back to the surface, they carried the underground with them. Stories about the time below, lessons about trust, patience, and survival. Maybe these stories turned into family legends passed down for generations. When the world was dangerous, we went below, we waited, we came back stronger. There's a pattern here, across history. After a disaster, people don't just rebuild what they lost. They add new layers. They keep some habits from the time of crisis. Maybe they keep food hidden in a cave just in case. Maybe they build new tunnels, or teach their children to listen for danger. The underground becomes part of the culture. Let's look at one more piece of evidence, artifacts left behind. Archaeologists have found toys carved from wood, spinning tops, little animals. These weren't just for passing the time. They show that even in fear, people made room for joy. They gave their children something to hold and play with, to remind them the world wasn't only danger and darkness. There's also music, simple flutes, drums and rattles. Imagine the sound echoing off stone walls, filling the city with rhythm. Maybe people sang to keep their spirits up, or to help children sleep. Maybe music was a way to say, "We're still here, we haven't given up." There's evidence of trade too. Even in hiding, people didn't cut themselves off from the world. Some storage rooms held goods from far away, shells from the coast, fabrics dyed with rare colours, beads of glass. Maybe traders visited in peaceful times. Maybe people snuck out to trade, then returned to safety. The underground city wasn't a prison. It was a base, a home, a hub. Now, let's think about the big picture. Why did people keep using these cities, even after the first danger passed? Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the only way to feel safe. Or maybe, over time, people just liked it. The earth became a second skin. Here's the thing. Survival is about more than just staying alive. It's about making life worth living, even in the worst conditions. The evidence from Derinkuyu and places like it shows that people didn't just wait for the storm to end. They built a life. They made rules, shared food, sang songs. They found comfort in each other and in the earth itself. When you look at all this, it's hard not to feel a little awe. Humans are stubborn. We don't just accept what the world gives us. We build, we carve, we adapt. Even when forced underground, we find a way to thrive. So the next time you hear about Derinkuyu, don't just picture fear. Picture warmth, laughter, routine. Picture a world where the earth itself became a shelter, a home, a womb, a place where people found safety, not just from enemies, but from the chaos of the world. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, we all remember that feeling. The comfort of being tucked away, hidden but not alone. Safe in the womb of earth, waiting for the right moment to rise again. That's what the evidence shows. Not just panic, but planning. Not just running, but building a better way to live, even when the world above is out of control. Next, let's see what all this means for us today. How the lessons from Derinkuyu still echo in the way we look for safety, comfort and hope, even in our own strange times. So what do we really take away from Derinkuyu and the story hidden beneath the rock? Let's step back and look at the big picture. When you zoom out, it's clear. This place is more than just a strange underground city. It's a mirror, showing us what humans do when the world gets strange or scary. And it's a reminder that the things we build, no matter how wild or impossible they seem, come from needs that are as old as time. Here's the thing. Derinkuyu isn't just about fear. It's about what people do with fear. Some run, some freeze. But the people here dug in, literally. They turned fear into planning. They turned anxiety into stone walls and clever tunnels. That's not just survival. That's creativity. That's turning a problem into a project. But let's not forget, there's still a big mystery at the heart of all this. We don't know exactly what forced them underground. There are theories: war, disaster, climate, disease. But we can't be sure. The city itself doesn't tell us. It doesn't have a sign saying this is why we built this. Instead, it gives us clues. Heavy doors, narrow passages, ventilation shafts, storage rooms. All these features point to one thing: people who expected trouble and wanted to be ready. Think about how much work went into this. Generations must have been involved. Parents teaching kids to carve stone. Elders sharing tips on how to make the tunnels safe. Maybe there were arguments. Some people might have wanted to stay above. Others might have pushed for more levels, deeper passages, new wells. It takes trust to build something this big together, and patience too. You don't finish a city like this in a year or even a decade. It's a project that outlives its builders. So why did they keep going? Why not stop at a few safe rooms? The answer might be simple. Once you start making a place safer, it's hard to stop. You improve the walls, you add another escape route, you make space for more food, more people. Over time, the city grows. It becomes more than just a hiding place. It turns into a second home, maybe even a first home for some. Here's what's wild. The people behind Derinkuyu didn't have blueprints, modern tools, or even much light. But they figured out problems one by one. How to get water down deep. How to let air in but keep smoke and danger out. How to feed everyone. Keep things clean and organize daily life. Every detail is a lesson in problem solving passed down in stone. But there's another piece. These underground cities show us how people respond when things get hard. They don't just give up. They adapt. They build new systems. Maybe they even find new meaning. In dark times, the city likely became more than a shelter. It was a place to rebuild trust, share stories, and dream about better days. Now, if you look closely, you can see echoes of Derinkuyu in the world today. Not the stone tunnels, but the idea behind them. People everywhere build safe places, sometimes real, sometimes just mental. Panic rooms, storm shelters, backup plans, secret stashes of food or money. Even community groups, support systems, and online spaces can be a kind of underground city for the mind. When things get rough, we look for ways to feel safe. That urge never goes away. There's another lesson too. Just like in Derinkuyu, most of us don't face big threats every day, but we still plan, we still worry, we still build routines and spaces to help us handle the unknown. Sometimes it's a real door you can close, sometimes it's just a habit or a comforting ritual. The drive to prepare is built into us. But here's where it gets deeper. The people of Derinkuyu left behind more than tunnels. They left behind a blueprint for hope in dark times. They showed that humans can create beauty and order even when the world outside is dangerous or wild. They brought art, music, and laughter into the shadows. They found ways to keep faith alive, even when they couldn't see the sun. And that's the real legacy. Not just the stone walls or secret passages, but the proof that people can shape their world, no matter how tough things get. They can make a home out of rock, find community in tight spaces, and pass on lessons to the next generation. So what's the big takeaway? If you strip away the mystery, the legends, and the wild theories, you're left with something simple but powerful. People survive because they help each other. They think ahead. They build safety nets, both real and invisible. And even when forced underground, they don't give up on joy, culture, or hope. Maybe there's a lesson here for us too. We all face our own storms, sometimes outside, sometimes inside. Maybe we can't carve out tunnels or roll giant stone doors shut, but we can still build places of safety. We can plan, adapt, and look out for each other. We can find meaning, even in the dark. One last thought. Derinkuyu lasted for centuries. People came and went. Threats changed. The world outside moved on. But the city stayed, ready for whatever came next. Maybe that's the point. We can't control everything, but we can prepare. We can hope. We can make something strong enough to last, something that helps the next person or the next generation when their time comes. So tonight, as you settle in, remember this. Deep under the ground, people once found a way to turn fear into hope and stone into shelter. They left behind more than tunnels. They left a message for all of us. Be ready, be kind, and never let the darkness win.